Hey guys, welcome to the 4-hour roundtable. This is our, I believe, 7th episode, which is quite amazing. We do it every other week, and we have an amazing group of panelists with us tonight, and we're going to discuss systemic racism and current situations and potential solutions. So I want to take it easy. I want to get started and go from there and just roll. Gabriel, you want to bring in the first guest?
All right, so here we go.
All right, Gabriel, you didn't even fit in the screen.
Yeah, I know.
So as the whole world knows, this is Gabriel. He is the brainchild of Mfsb Live. I'm not going to pronounce it all because it's just too much.
Yes, it is.
And and it is streaming everywhere, so we all know that. And Gabriel is a friend of mine. He is the brainchild behind this. He's the co-creator of this with me.
Yes,
we have put it on his platform, and he is going to be a panelist with us tonight. So this should be an interesting dynamic change for him.
So let's go ahead and start with our first one. If you want to introduce Miss Megan.
Sure.
Let me bring her in.
You got to bring her in.
You got to bring in first. There we go.
All right, there we go. Hey, Megan. This is Megan Riley. She is an entrepreneur, a podcaster, a mom to 3 daughters. Her business, Tippy Toe Dance Company, serves children of all over the country with 35 franchises, recently expanded internationally. Megan's podcast, Who is Your Mama?, explores motherhood with firsthand accounts from legendary mamas. Megan's focus has always been on serving others.
All right.
Welcome to the show, Megan.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. This is such a great thing. I'm happy to be a part of it.
Awesome.
We are very excited to have you.
Let's bring in our next guest, Mr. Chet Sisk.
Yeah, just Sisk.
Sisk. There it is.
Hey, Chet. How are you doing, Chet? I've known Chet for a while now.
Yes, that's right.
Chet is a futurist of Universal Basic Resources Private Equity Fund. That's not a mouthful. His focus is on helping us understand the changes that will reshape the world over the next few years and how you can thrive and succeed in this new environment. He is helping to create new infrastructure that transforms society. So we are looking forward to hearing what Chet has to say on potential solutions because he's in the future.
Yes, that's right. And thank you, Michael, for inviting me and staying with me over the years. I've been just running around, and you've been a very consistent brother, so I appreciate that. Much love.
I don't seem to let people go too.
All right, so let's start with our next guest. You know him as Dr. Russ Barnes, so let's go ahead and bring Dr. Russ.
So we have Dr. Russ Barnes. He is a retired U.S. Air Force colonel. He is the chief strategist for Sistro Solutions, an organizational development firm specializing in small businesses. He is a 3-time published author and the creator of Purposefully Profitable Podcast.
You did that very well, Michael. A lot of people struggle with that Purposefully Profitable Podcast, but I love it. I love the way it flowed. And I'm really happy also to be on this show and appreciate all the connections that you have sent my way so that I can collaborate and help with people all around the place. So thank you.
I love helping people that want to help, friend. And you inspired me on our first conversation, and I just always try to inspire others. Anything I can do to help, I'm try.
All right, let's introduce our last panelist so far, Liz Liba.
Oh boy, let's see how bad I butcher this. Liz Liba has taught as an English professor both online and face-to-face at a dozen universities. Most recently, she serves as instructional design manager for City College. Elizabeth's latest adventure is as the co-host of the Ed Up Experience podcast, where she interviews higher education leaders. Elizabeth loves sharing her ideas, connecting through LinkedIn, and has over 12,000. Thank you for joining us, Liz. I'm glad you're here. Our first conversation, I said, "Hey, by the way, can you do next week?" And you said, "Yeah, I'm in." So it was. You have amazing knowledge to share.
Thank you.
So excited. So what I'd like to start off doing is, what we usually do is start off with a couple of questions. I'm not as prepared as other people, so what I do is do things on the fly. So we're just going to roll with it.
Yes.
So So let's just roll around, right? We'll start with Gabriel, the panelist. Based on what's going on in Wisconsin, Gabriel, what are your feelings of the current events, how they're affecting society, right? Because we're going from extremes, we're going from, people, innocent people getting murdered, white, black, purple, pink, Hispanic, everything, right? I mean, what is going on? Why is society actually getting worse, or is it just that it's more in mainstream media?
I for me personally, I think it is. A lot of it has to do with, of course, everybody now has a camera. Everybody's out there, can see everything now. Everybody has access to social media. It does intensify what's going on, but it also shows us that there really is a lot of injustice and things going on that, we probably wouldn't have known about 10, 20, even 30 years ago. Some of these things we wouldn't even found out about. So you might have read it in a paper, maybe in a blurb or something like that. So social media, yes, has a lot to do with what's going on, and especially what happened up there in Wisconsin. It seems that though we've had a lot of these conversations about wanting to change and do a lot of things, and yet we're still in the same. It seems that we're still repeating the same cycle. We've seen a lot of the same things. I mean, George Floyd, there was so much anger, right? And then Breonna Taylor comes along, and we were still frustrated. People were still out there rioting, and then everything seemed to calm down a little bit. And then, what happened up there in Wisconsin, the same sort of deal. We see it again, and it's like, when are we going to learn as a society, that that these sort of things now that you got to understand, people are everywhere. You do something, and even not to say that what is happening is a reflection of all police officers, but I think it's in some point we have to really look at it. And we've had former police officers on the show. We've heard them talk about the training and the things that they go through, and it still seems that there hasn't been a change in the way that law enforcement approaches a lot of these situations still. I mean, it still seems like it's a shoot first mentality. And it's crazy to still see it all the time. I mean, this guy got shot 7 times in front of his kids. He's paralyzed now. And then on top of that, while he was in jail, they had handcuffs on him because he had a warrant. I mean, how crazy does that sound? And to think about it and go, oh my gosh, this sounds like a broken record, like a bad dream. I'm still waiting to wake up and go, okay, let's change. What are some of the things we change? And then here it goes. I mean, for me, it's been lately, I'm just waiting for the next city, for the next person. And that's sad. That's sad that I have to think of that way and then look at news and go, oh my gosh, here it is again. Here we are. And it's at some point it gets very frustrating to see it over and over again. And we do these things for a reason, because we want people to really go out and learn and understand. We want to have, we want to have these conversations so we can open these channels, but then it's like everything that we're doing, we're even if we're trying as hard as we're trying, something like that happens and it counters it. And it's because it's magnitude by 1,000, because it's on social media, it's on news, it's on every news outlet, it's everywhere. So it is, again, it's hard, but again, we doesn't mean we still don't have the opportunity to change it. I think that's what we're here to do, is to at least get this out there again and get everybody back in the habit of going, hey, I get it, man. It is tough to do that over and see it over and over. Somebody else shot and killed, and somebody, and it gets to the point where I'm at that point where I want to go out and start doing the things that I hope will add change to my own local environment, to my own local city, to go out there and start doing these things again. This is why I've changed my mission, because I see it and I keep seeing it cycle over and over again, and I just cannot sit back and wait for the next one. I really have to go out there and start again, going to change somebody's life, maybe the right person's life at that moment in time, so something like this doesn't happen so quickly. It doesn't happen again. It'd be foolish to say it's not going to happen again, but to at least maybe change somebody's trajectory, somebody's life. And that's really what's pushing me, man. So
and I think you made a lot of key points there. I really do. And Megan, with you, I want to do something a little different. I want to build off Gabriel's answer. I want your opinion on if the instant access to these things happening is really the impact that's changed everything.
I mean, I think it definitely has changed depending on who you're talking to. I think there's plenty of people in our world that have known this firsthand for a long time. And then I think there's other people that didn't know or didn't, for a million different reasons. And so I do think the videos and the access to it right away and, news in real time is transformational. And I think it's important. And I think it's opening the eyes of a lot of people that have been insulated from this type of reality. And I think that's great. I mean, I think it's necessary. I think it's like you can pull the, cover over your head, but it doesn't mean other things aren't happening. And so I think it being in your face and it being very clear, it's like, so, you can see this and you can either say, I'm going to just watch and see, hopefully somebody figures out and somebody makes improvements, or I'm going to know what's going on in the world that I live in, what's happening to my neighbors and people that I know, and I'm going to, do better or, find solutions or be a part of the solution. It's overwhelming, I think. And I also understand a lot of people, I am sure there's frustration over, the people that have been dealing with this forever and being like saying it and over and over and over. And then now it's like taking the video and taking this over and over happening again and again. And it's like, but I'm glad that it's out. I'm glad that this is a topic. I'm glad that you can't look away from this. You cannot, in my opinion, live in the world we're living in now and look away and like continue the way that you have if you didn't know about it. And I think many people are like, we've been fighting this fight. We've been dealing with this. We've known this. This has happened to our brothers and sisters and cousins and family and, everybody. But I think it's awful, and I think it's important. And I think that it is, takes away anyone's excuse to not act. There's no excuse to not act. And I don't have any answers, just for the record, zero. But I am like, I am aware, and I want to do my part to be a part of the solution, and not passing it off on anybody else, and not, going and, just asking questions. I want to educate myself and educate those that are in my world. And I feel like if that's, something anybody can do, regardless of everything else you believe in. You can get more educated. You can be aware of what's going on. You can, find those kind of, resources that help tell you the truth and show you what's going on. So I feel like the videos have certainly changed it. I think it's probably been the single most impactful change in how this is all being handled and how this is all being brought to light in a completely new way. You cannot deny what you see with your own two eyes. It is what it is. And so then it's up to us for us to react accordingly.
That's a great addition. Thank you, Megan. I do appreciate that. I agree with you on all those. I mean, I personally don't understand what it's like, right? I can't kid myself that but I definitely support the apostle. That was one of the reasons that we put this in first. I would like to introduce Mr. Stanley Green. He's able to join us. Stanley is currently the president of Power Think Group, a global human development firm which helps people and organizations thrive. He has conducted several He has conducted successful resilience and power thinking workshops with partners in Beijing, Beijing, China, and Tokyo, and Japan. In the USA, he has conducted similar workshops for insurance giant Aflac, Global Media Leaders Conference. Thanks for joining us. I do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So I really do appreciate it. So Chet, Chet, I want to take it. Well, okay. So wait, will you pick an order, please? I love you, but the different shapes are changing the order on me. A little bit more curveballs, right? So let's do this, right? Let's take it to Chet, and I want to continue with you're in the futurism side, right? So I want to understand a little bit of your perspective of how technology is impacting where we're at today, right? Obviously, we've been talking about how media, the instant availability to see these things, whether it's live on Instagram, TikTok, whatever it may be. We're seeing these things as they happen, right? We're not waiting for the 5 o'clock news. We're not waiting for the newspaper or morning news. It's a whole different world. Right. But as you look at futurism and you look going forward, I mean, how does that impact this circumstance?
That's a great question. I'll let me just provide just a little bit of some context, and then I want to rush because I want to hear what everybody else has to say. The bottom line is that I became a futurist because of my grandparents. As a child, I'd sit in the living room, and they would say the same thing over and over again. Can't trust white folks because they do crazy stuff. They're lying to us. They're not telling us the truth. This is what they would say. So this was, some odd years ago. So what we're really experiencing now is really the manifestation of systemic corruption that has been going on for so long. It's been able to keep a lid on, and what technology has done is at least exposed it. So we can thank the technology for this particular moment. I know a lot of people probably don't want to thank it, but that's exactly what it did. It's just said, hey, you know what? Them black people have been talking about this stuff for at least 400 years. And now we get a chance, everybody else gets a chance to experience their stories, and they cannot be dismissed as, oh, it's just sour grapes. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You're just whining, you're complaining all the time. Why is this? Now everybody is seeing that. That doesn't mean that people are moved to action. It only means now we get the chance to share our story. So the deeper story here is not necessarily, it is systemic racism, but it's also climate change, income inequality, misogyny. So we haven't gotten to the deeper question, and that is, can a society that is deeply embedded in corruption on fundamental levels survive? And I would submit to you that it can't. It must transform. So what this moment, as a futurist, my application is always that we have to look at this moment as an opportunity in order to become the country that we say that we think that we are. We're not there. America has never been great. It's always had the potential to be great, but it's never gotten to that place. But that moment has never been closer than this moment right now. As crazy as all of this seems, this is that moment. So from a futurist perspective, I'm watching these trends. I'm looking at all the things, how countries usually navigate these kinds of moments. The track record ain't very good. However, no one has been in this particular place with the technology that we have today and with the ability to rally these resources into one thing. I've never seen a country with the ability to do it as we do. But it's going to take something from us that we've never seen before. We are going to have to become greater than we've ever imagined. And so that's my avocation, is to help us to get past the drama of the moment. And I'm not trying to diminish it, because the killing of any lives and black bodies being strewn all over the place as just a casual thing is reprehensible. But what we can do is to say, okay, instead of allowing this to go, because the temptation is to want to go back to status quo, right? So go back and let's hold hands and sing Kumbaya, and then we'll get the right political person elected, and then we'll return to well, we have to remember that it was the status quo that led us here in the first place. And we miss that point. We keep missing it because we want to nail it or hang that upon a president and say, if he was not here, we wouldn't have these problems. That's just not true. It would just go unreported, or it wouldn't be exposed. So we really have to think about, who do we want to be when we grow up? That's the moment that we're standing in right now. And that's what I talk about when I speak about the future. And when I speak about the future, I'm talking about the next couple of years.
Thanks. Thank you, Chet. I have a tremendous amount of respect for you. I've known you for a while now, and your insights are always tremendous and valuable. So Stanley, I'm going to go to you now, and with your background in resilience training, right? I really, and power thinking and everything that you do, I really want to understand a little bit better how you look at this circumstance and your perspective on it based on, what your expertise is, right? It goes beyond color of skin. It goes beyond status. It goes beyond any of those things. This is more of your personal perspective and where you stand with all of that based on your experience, life experience, work experience, and how you train and teach people, so that moving forward, we evolve past this stuff.
Sure. So I think a few people mentioned it, the power of technology and what it's done. In my career, I've probably crammed about 3 lifetimes of careers into one. And most dominant was my experience in telecommunications and cable TV. So going back now 40 years ago, I actually attended a course in Chicago for about 2 months called Applied Communications Fundamentals. And the focus was on how we were moving from analog to digital and how digital would change everything, and from copper to fiber optics. And now Verizon has a service, because I was with the company Verizon when it was all part of AT&T and then Bell Atlantic. But how that would change everything. And so I've kind of lived this in engineering and construction, regulatory, and then moving into the cable TV business for a few years, running cable systems. I ran a music channel, video music channel called The Box, back in the 90s. And so all those experiences, having to see this evolution, and then creating a news channel that had as part of its component 20 years ago what we call the neighborhood news corps, where people could use their camcorders, and at the time we're talking multi camcorders, to record police actions, community events, and then send them via tape. Well, of course, that wasn't feasible at the time, but now all of this convergence, of telecom, cable, and video, the internet and wireless, and the ability to instantaneously capture, through a smartphone, what's going on, has changed everything. So with power thinking, what we've done is that we've acquired a company that had the intellectual property rights to a material that came out of the University of Pennsylvania's Positive Psychology Center. And they did over 50 years of research, starting with testing a theory called learned helplessness. And if you think about what's going on with the pandemic, what's going on with social unrest, there are a number of people that are in a state of helplessness, where they don't know how we're going to get out of, what we're in, particularly as it relates to society. But what they also began to study was that people can learn to change, to be optimistic. And at the root of all of it is that we have these 7 skills that were evident, that are evidence-based, that came out of Penn. Things like avoiding thinking traps. One of the big thinking traps, and there are 8 of them, that has gotten us to this point, was overgeneralization. Where people will paint other people with a broad brush. Going all the way back to slavery, where they said folks who are of a darker hue should be subservient, and they should never be educated, and so forth and so on. And we are suffering from those beliefs, those deep-rooted beliefs, going way back. And that way back, by the way, wasn't really that long ago. My great-grandmother, I remember when I was younger, we used to stay with her in South Philadelphia, spend a lot of time with her. When I did the ancestry to check her roots, she was born in 1888. And I remember her. When I checked when her dad was born, I found that he was born in 1837. This is a person I remember. And her dad, my great-great-grandfather, was born in 1837, which means in Athens, Georgia, which means most likely he enslaved. And so the question becomes, what were the beliefs of those folks who deemed him property? And what beliefs were passed down, not many generations now, that we are still dealing with today? So it is beliefs that have to change. And that's one of the skills of resilience, other than avoiding thinking traps like overgeneralization, but challenging deep-rooted, long-held beliefs. Now, it's very difficult for folks to do that. I think these images are starting to change beliefs. But for most of those folks, those beliefs are still entrenched. And what's going to have to happen, what is happening, thank goodness, is we have these new generations of people who are thinking differently. They're saying, I don't understand why, because of the color of someone's skin, we should treat them this way. And then the combination of technology and communications, it's meaning that, protests are rising up and sustaining themselves, not only all over the country, but all over the world, which are pushing back, where young people are pushing back on the beliefs of their parents and their grandparents. And I'm optimistic that all of this changes, mostly because of the young folks pushing back and challenging these long-held beliefs.
Thank you very much, Stanley. I appreciate it, and I love your perspective. And my 3-year-old's visiting me, so this is just how we roll on live, right? My 3-year-old gets involved, and she becomes the star. I go put on a diaper, and then you can see. Welcome to Potty Training 101.
Hey, bring her in. Heck, we know how.
Good old days.
This is the new world.
Sid, I just froze. You need a diaper if you want to go on air. I'm frozen, so I can't do anything. Gabe, mute me or throw me out, and I'll come back in.
I got you, buddy. I got you on mute. So, that's kind of the way that we roll a little bit here. Mike, guys, if you don't know, is a single father of 3 taking care of all his kids. So, we always know that that's sometimes what we got to deal with, whenever we're dealing with this situation, but that's okay. It is the new world. This is what we live in, guys. And this is part of, Pandemic 101 of how we operate in these systems here. So, Liz, let's go with you and kind of keep the ball rolling in the same sort of situation, talking about, kind of what everybody's kind of reiterated a little bit, but what are your views on what you've seen lately, and what are your opinions on, this situation and the situations that have passed in these last couple months as far as talking about systemic racism and dealing with racism in general?
A lot of what I think I echo a lot of what of the other panelists have mentioned, in that there's always been a little bit of I would say a stigma attached to talking about race in America. As a Black woman, I know that I've been very measured previous to maybe the past 6 months. So you're talking about majority of my life, because there's always been a little bit of a stigma. Someone mentioned pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and our parents told us that. As Stanley mentioned, most of us, I'm an immigrant myself. My parents are from the Caribbean. So not necessarily, the boat dropped us off on a different island before they came on to the new world. However, most of our parents, whether they were born here in the South, or if they were from the islands, or if they were, Latino, work twice as hard do twice as much, be quiet, put your head down, smile, and go to school, and you'll be able to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and everyone has opportunity, especially for immigrants. We're always told that. So there is a lot of a stigma attached to speaking out when it comes to racism, because if you experience racism in the workplace or microaggressions, or you're not paid as much, you get passed over for a promotion. That's not why. Everybody's equal and everybody has the same opportunity. So you're told not to speak out about those aggressions, perhaps in the workplace. We know, statistically speaking, that Black men and Black women make less than a white, non-Latino, non-Hispanic male. We know that there's 8% of Blacks in the C-suite. We know from myself in higher education, 5% of faculty are Black. However, up to 30% of the students are Black. And that I know because I've looked at the statistics myself, and I see that at my school, career colleges, and some of the more not as selective schools tend to trend on the higher side. And that's for another wealth of reasons, because K through 12 funding is not equivalent in Black neighborhoods. We have redlining, which is a descendant of segregation, which is a descendant of slavery. So there's a whole layer upon layer that we have to unpack. And if we don't talk about it, then how can we fix it? And someone talked about the idea of awareness. If we're always told, well, don't talk about it, everything's equal, just work harder and you'll get to the same level. But then we keep working and we see that if there's only 4 Black men that are Fortune 500 presidents, clearly we're as intelligent, we're going to school, we're getting we see plenty of very intelligent Black men and women on this panel, but we're not getting the same opportunities. The police brutality that's occurring is just another stem, another branch of that tree, because obviously these same men and women in the police force, they're a product of their environment, and they see the media. I was on another panel and somebody said 75% of folk don't have a Black friend. And I said, wow, if 75% of folk don't have a Black friend, I can see why women can make strides in the Me Too movement. If right now it's 8:30, but it's dark outside, and if I try to go walk by myself, my husband's gonna be like, no, where you going? You can't walk by yourself. Where you gonna just take a stroll around the neighborhood? He's not saying all men are rapists, but there are some men that are rapists, so you might not want to go out there. But if a Black man says, I'm afraid of police, stop saying that. There's only a few bad apples. We're not saying that all police are killers, but the ones that are killers, I don't want to come across them, right? It's like the one man that might be a rapist in my neighborhood. I'm not going to take a jog right there by myself because I don't want him to snatch me into the bushes, and then my husband might not see me till tomorrow. That's not what I want for myself. So we have to wake up out of this walking on eggshells and not unpacking what's happening around us. Doesn't mean all white people are racist. Doesn't mean all police are going out there killing people. But like Chris Rock said, we can't afford bad apples on the police force. We can't afford bad apples that are pilots that might fly into a mountain. I don't want to be on that plane. So the same reason we don't want that man to pull us over and, hey, ma'am, you want to get out the car? And I'm like, why should I get out the car? Put your hands up, because we don't know who that one bad apple might be. So I don't want to roll the dice, just like I'm not going to roll the dice right now and go for a jog at 9 o'clock at night and just hope that man I'm jogging next to isn't a rapist. I don't want to wait and say, you know what? All police aren't bad. Nobody's saying that. But we as a society need to stop putting our head in the sand and talk about these things. Be educated, be aware. And as many of the esteemed panelists have said, the video and putting these on the table is the first step. We got to unpack it. And a lot of these police departments are saying, you know what, we need to think about how we can address some of these issues, whether it's community policing, whether it's, having more social workers. We're not saying that they're all bad, but we have to start coming up with solutions, because men and women are out here dying. And to say comply, Tamir Rice was 12. I have a child, I have a 21-year-old and a 5-year-old. If right now somebody rolls up on them and says, drop that toy gun, You mean to tell me that child can't get a minute to collect themselves and know what's going on? You mean to tell me Breonna Taylor was in her bed and she should have complied? You mean Trayvon, who was carrying some Skittles, should have complied? You mean Ahmaud Arbery that was jogging in his neighborhood should have complied? Okay, you want to demonize Jacob Blake, you want to demonize George Floyd, but you can't explain away every single situation. We have to face it. We have to be real about it. We have to stop getting triggered by white supremacy, racism. Don't get triggered. If someone says homophobia, I don't get triggered because I'm not a homophobe. So there's nothing for me to be triggered about. If somebody says sexual abuse or pedophilia, I'm not triggered by that because I'm not doing those things. So if you're not doing them, don't get triggered. Just sit here, look in the mirror, and come up with some ways to fix it. And let's all work together instead of people getting so upset and riled up and getting so mad about calling a spade a spade. If you're not a spade, don't worry about it. Let's dig out the spades and let's figure out how to fix it.
Oh, Michael, we can't hear you.
Oh, there we go. That might be better. I'm telling you, the 3-year-old got me all tripped up. So, Liz, that was unbelievable. Powerful as ever. Our conversation when we spoke last week was amazing, and it went even deeper than that. I mean, I think me and you went back in time a few thousand years when we were talking. So, I think there's more to uncover and more to unpack with this. And the reality is, we need to be teaching the real truth and the real history, right? And the history is obviously an issue that we've been avoiding for a while, right? Because we don't want to admit mistakes. That's the only way we learn, by talking about learning from our past mistakes so we never make them again. So Dr. Russ, I want to add on top of this to another level. I want to talk a little bit more about socioeconomic issues, because I know that with your military career and the direction you've gone since, that's a huge passion of yours. And really thank you for your service, one, and I really want to take it that direction a little bit, because I think your expertise can add another layer on top of everything.
So I'm going to start by saying that, number one, I want to respond to Gabriel in saying that this thing keeps coming around and around and around and around and around. And the reason it keeps coming around is because we are not able to have conversations about the root cause. And I've been in so many conversations with people and trying to get them, when they come on and they say, this looting is awful, this rioting, this burning, and why are they burning their own neighborhoods, and all these conversations, my comeback to them is, what about the root cause? Well, let's talk about the root cause, because if we deal with that, then we don't have to be concerned with looting and rioting, because nobody's protesting. What would you protest if there was nothing to protest about? And their sort of response is, people are sitting back waiting for something to happen as a catalyst so they can go loot, steal, and kill innocent children. And that logic makes no sense whatsoever, but that's the kind of responses that I get when I get involved in these conversations. And I'll be honest with you, I've gotten very frustrated with having those conversations. But what I did is I said, okay, I'm listening to your arguments, and I would push them a little bit purposefully. And kind of piss them off a little bit purposefully, because I wanted to know the depth of their argument and where they were coming from. And so it was all sort of a diversion and a diverting from the real argument. Nobody wants to talk about that. So we have to talk about the root cause. So one of the things I took some time to do, because I wanted my arguments to be solid. If I'm going to state a position, I'm going to make a case. I want my case to be solid, as I want their case to be solid. So, a lot of the things that have been said here are right on point, and it starts with the communication piece. And so I'm going to connect that socioeconomic through the communication. And if I am making a point, then what is that point based upon? So when we look at the socioeconomic situations that we are dealing with today, it goes back and it starts with slavery, forced-free labor, an inability to build wealth through compensation for our labor. It went through sharecropping, which was debt loading, and that created an inability to build wealth through labor and property ownership. You come down to convict leasing, which is forced-free labor, and for anybody who doesn't understand the 13th Amendment, where that came from, it said the slaves are free, except in instances where they have been convicted of a crime. That's a loophole. And as soon as that amendment was passed and slavery was no longer available for free labor, that loophole was exercised, and slaves or former bonded people were then picked up for every minor infraction, convicted of a crime, and then put back into the system to serve free labor. And so, you go with convict leasing and inability to build wealth through labor, continued on Jim Crow, racial segregation, that inhibited education, labor, housing, health, justice, inequality, and inadequacy was what you were dealing with there. Redlining, housing discrimination, so inability to build wealth through property ownership and appreciation. Then you get into blockbusting, which was not only just a inability to build wealth due to intentional devaluation of property, but then it began to lean into how did blockbusting work? You have realtors who come in and say, oh, there's a black person moving into your neighborhood. You better sell your property now and get out before it goes, before you will no longer be able to live in this community. And then so they sell, the white people in the community sell low. The black people coming into the community now have to buy high, and the realtors are making out like gangbusters. But what happened in there is then the fear is being created that if a black person moves into my neighborhood, my property is going to be devalued. I better get out while I can. And then that whole economic thing shifts. And you've got now a community where that entire community is devalued. Then you go into, so where we've moved into now, when you have that kind of poverty and you have that kind of desperation, and you're also faced with the inability to get work that enables you to live a lifestyle or build wealth. Now, how are you getting your money? And this is where, crime begins to creep in. So now you've got these communities that have been built like this, created like this, structured like this, and then the police come in. Now the police come in because their job is to reduce crime, to stop crime, but there's so much crime that's beginning to creep in that they begin to see those people no longer as human people making contributions to society, but problems that we need to suppress, problems that we need to control. And they control it with their guns. They don't control it with an understanding of what's happening in the community and being supportive of that. It's now, let's contain. We have this policy of containment. As long as those crimes do not come beyond the border of this community, we're all happy, because the people who need to be protected are protected. As long as they're protected, we'll be supported, and we're all happy. So then that rolls into, plea bargaining process, and I won't go into detail on that, but essentially there's a system in this country where there are so many cases before the court that when the case comes before the judge wants to plea bargain that case so that they can get to the other, 1,000 cases that they have to get to. So you have people who are going to jail for felony charges because their choices are, you either accept this plea bargain and do 2 years, or you take your chances on trial and you'll be facing 25 to life. And any reasonable person would say, well, I'd rather plead guilty and get 2 years than try to take my chances in court and get 25 to life. And if anybody doesn't believe that system works, watch the Khalif Browder story. It's heartbreaking. It's like 6 episodes of this individual who was accused of a crime, stealing somebody's backpack. He didn't do it, and he refused to go in and say he did. He was in jail for 3 years awaiting trial. There's a Fourth Amendment that says you can't do that. You have a right to a speedy trial. You have a right to due process. These are certain things that are happening, and because it happens so frequently, and because the Black community is disproportionately affected by these policies and the implementation of these policies, in the Black community, policing is provoke and punish. You get somebody out of their car, you stand them up, they get pissed off because they're being treated in an undignified manner and without respect, and then you get charged with resisting arrest or fighting against the police. Now they're throwing you on the ground. Now they're handcuffing you. Now you go into jail. Now you're in the system, and when you get in the system, you're done. Period. Plain and simple, you're done. So now we have the current real big challenge is that plus mass incarceration. Prisons are privatized and they're for profit. So what does that mean? We have to keep those beds filled. So the judicial system is feeding this mass incarceration problem. in 1970s, there were like 300,000 people in America who were in prison. Right now, we have 2.5 million people in prison in the United States. That's more than some small countries. Not only that, but you have another 4.5 or 3.5 people on probation or parole. You can't tell me that there's that many people in this country who have criminal intent and are doing such bad things that we have to incarcerate and have people on parole. That many people, it just doesn't add up. So we have to go back and look at how this entire stream of history has happened and what are those things that we can do about it. So some of the solutions that I thought about were really fixing the legislation. So we talk about voting and getting everybody out to vote, and that is incredibly important, but voting is the middleman. What really has to happen is taking a real strong look at legislation, because as we came through Jim Crow, the laws that were put on the books to sustain, maintain, and enforce segregation, some of those still exist, and some of those still inform how enforcement is done. And so what we have a real problem with as a Black community is not, it is the bad police, but what it is that the police have a mandate, and they also have a get out of jail free card when they do things that are obviously against the law. So when you put your knee on the neck of a man for 8.5 minutes until that man dies, and then you're not worried about people with a camera in your face, you're not worried about who's watching, because you know that you're going to be able to get off. You know that you're not going to go to jail as a result of that crime, and it is a crime. And so what we want, in my opinion, not speaking for everybody, but generally speaking, is the fairness of the way the law is administered, and that we are no less subject to fairness of the law in its administration. So if somebody commits a crime against me, we want them to be punished just like they would be punished against anybody else. And so the last thing I'm going to say is that responding back to the technology, I was born in the 60s, 60 to be exact, and television with the Selma, that was one of those first things people started to get television, and now they could see the police using fire hoses and dogs and batons on people in the streets. And so it goes back to where now you can't negate the disbelief. You can't deny that these things are happening. And then in the 80s, when the video cameras came out, the video recorders, and you had the Rodney King instance, and you could see, many people just beating the man on the ground. He's already down. Why are you continuing to just beat him? And the fact that, that incident was publicized, but it was happening to so many other people. That was just one representative case. Now you have everybody with a cell phone. And so now you're beginning to see it. It's beginning to be public. People can't deny it. And it's much more difficult to, like you said before, our panelists have said before, to not be able to take action and say, this is not just, this is not right. We need to do something about it. But for me, I want to really focus in on the systemic injustice, the systemic racism, and take a look at the legislation that's in place and make some gains on that. And I actually put an article out called Speak Truth to Justice, Put Your Money Where Your Mouth Is. And it talked about some of those things in terms of how we could reform the prison system as well as reform the educational system.
Thank you very much, Dr. Russ. I appreciate it. And if I seem distracted, it's all three of my kids taking turns running out here, me hitting mute, me hitting, turning off mute, me jumping back and forth. I mean, I agree with everything that everybody said so far, right? There's so many pieces to this puzzle, and it's so deep rooted in our system, in our society, the way that it was even created, right? The way that the U.S. and this country was created, it was created off labor. And when free labor started segregating one individual group is when it became a systemic issue. And it was created that way from the very beginning. So if we go back, we really look at this, what are potential solutions, right? And how do we start educating the youth properly so that the history books aren't whitewashed, for argument of any other word, right? How do we really do that? And I'm really curious because, my 3 kids through this education system that I'm not a fan of. And I want to make sure that they are different than what's used out of our education system, right? I want them to be empathetic. I want them to be courageous. I want them to stand up for others. And I want them to understand real equality. So if we're looking at it from that perspective, I really want to go around and really hear some ideas, some thoughts, some concepts of maybe how we can do this, maybe what we need to bring to be able to create solutions. Bill, why don't you get us started with the solution side?
I'm sorry, who?
Gabriel.
Oh, me. Oh, okay. Cool. I didn't hear my name, so I was like, what? Who are we talking to? Okay, cool. Well, again, gosh, I think so much it always starts, like what everybody's reiterated a little bit, starts at a local level, man. I think that's really important about how we go and approach things. That's why, that's why I want to go out and start helping at a local level, because that's where it starts with me. That's where it starts with my neighborhood. It's where it's going to start with my schools, the churches, anything that you go around here. It all starts locally. How you vote for your school board, how you vote for, who the city manager is that's going to run the city, who does all these things around here. These are all important factors that we don't even think about. A lot of people don't think about whenever they're going out and taking the time to vote. Who sits on your school board? How many people here can sit and tell you who your school board president is? How many? That's shocking. These are the people that are helping develop what is going to help teach our kids. That's what's nuts to me, is that the fact that here we are, we're sitting here talking about doing these things and going out and finding solutions and how do we change things. I think that's how a lot of it starts. I mean, it's starting out with who's how are we starting or educating our kids? That's a lot of what goes into what changes everything. And again, learning who polices our areas. I mean, people in key areas of each and one of our municipalities that we sit on, most people can't name their mayor, school board president, city manager, chief of police. These are all people that are a very important part of what creates where we live, where we operate, and how we function as an environment around here. I mean, to me, that's where a lot of these things have to really start changing, is getting involved and at that level. Hey, Sid. And getting to that point, I think that right there, that's the resource right there sitting next to him. That's the resource. What it is and how we change their perceptions in life, how we teach them what life is, how to function in life, how do we coexist with each other. I think all that starts here. I mean, again, I've talked to conversations with people around here that I'm starting to learn more and more about my local environment. And I get to the point where people are the same way. I hear their frustrations. I hear them talk about what are the things that make them angry, the things that they want to change. And I say, okay, here's the thing. What have you done about it? Who have you went and talked to? Have you went to a school board meeting? Do you know how the school board, do you know where they post a lot of these things at? These are the things that we got to teach each other. And that's why I say it all starts, for me, it all starts on changing how I live and how I coexist right here in my neighborhood, in my city, in my town. And this is why, for me, that's the next step where I go as far as how I want to go talk about changing the world. Is going out there and doing these things and finding out who these people are, communicating, let them know what my concerns are. So hopefully maybe they go, well, at least there's a few concerned citizens around here who want to understand about what's going on and learn about it, maybe change it at some point. But, again, it's like you can't start at the top of the mountain and expect everything to change. It's a slow climb. It's learning everything around here and then learning what goes on again in my town, and then go to the next step and start educating people on how they can change it. Learn the whole system, the process, and go, these are the problems, these are the holes, these are the things that people don't understand. Bills, legislation, teaching all these people all these things. A lot of times people don't know how to, all these things even function. And this is our government, this is our lives. We have to live inside these quote unquote bubbles. And if we don't take a part in a part of what we're doing, all we are is we're just waiting to become a victim. We're all waiting to become a victim of what goes on, because if we don't go in here and do something about it, the next person that gets pulled over, that's pulled and shot and put the neck, what have we done about it? It's great to talk about it. To me, it's great that we get these discussions out there. But for me, in my heart of hearts, and where I want to go and start doing things and change, it's interacting out there in the real world. Really go seeing what is out there and what goes on around in my neighborhood, so I know who the police officers are around here, where all the fire department, all this stuff is important to me. So that's, for me, I think is what I think is really important is just changing how I go and interact, and how we interact as adults with our education, with our neighbors, with our city officials. I think that's where it all starts, where we can actually make a change and see difference. I mean, it's going to take a long time. It's going to take really, really long time to get difference on the state level, the federal level. That's, again, we're talking about, yes, that's where voting comes into it. That's where everybody has to go out there and make a decision, and hopefully an informed decision. But for me, that's where I start, and I think that's where I feel that a lot of progress can be made. So, thank you, Mike.
No, Gabe, thank you. I appreciate it. So I'm gonna go a little bit on a ledge here, right? Like, I'm a white male in this country, and it's a lot different for me than it is for other, right? Color, African Americans, whatever we want to say. I want to talk about. I want to take it to Megan, and I want to go a little bit more about how it starts at home, right? Because I know for me, it's how I'm raising my children to believe differently. That is where I feel that's where it starts. There's the education system I don't like. There's issues. There's major issues with almost every system, right? I don't feel like we can accomplish that, maybe even in one life. So I feel like that's a generational thing, which also means how we raise our children changes. Megan, are you willing to run with that a little bit?
I am, yeah. So I'm raising 3 little girls. They're 3, 5, and 7, and I mean, I feel like a lot of the things that have been discussed. To be perfectly honest, I've learned a lot this year. I grew up in Oklahoma, and I was taught to love everybody, and everyone is equal, and that was how I went through life. But this has all been, I've gotten a real education on like what's actually going on. Watching 13, understanding the systemic part of this is a completely different experience than being like racism is a problem. That's ridiculous compared to what's actually happening. It's so much more than that. So for me, and I felt like I want to know how to equip my kids to not just be going through life. I want them to be a part of the solution, like I said early on. So, I'm mindful of what books we have. Are all of our books of little white girls doing things, or is there diversity, and is there celebration of that? And is it showing different stories of different people? And so that and that's, it changes as your kids obviously grow. So right now, 3, 5, and 7, I'm being mindful of what that conversation is. But that I know that conversation needs to evolve as they get older. So I would say first it started with my education of getting a deeper understanding with my perspective. My perspective is what it is, but like I am now an adult, and I'm accountable to educate myself to help the next generation and help us as we are. So I needed to educate myself more, and I continue to do that, and I continue to push myself. And then obviously that like feeds into how I'm raising my kids. Of course, I'm raising my kids at, every, people are equal. Like you can see different colors and you can understand that, but like inclusivity is important. And those are conversations that's just how we live our life. But, we have talked about the different things, and, for them, they're like, I can't believe, we'll talk about my parents. I can't believe Honey knew a time when people couldn't use the same water fountain. We'll have those conversations. And for them, it's like, it's so difficult to understand. And actually, my husband and I had the conversation about they're so pure. And so there's a part of you that, like, at one point we were like, it stinks to have to be like, this is out there, but also I want to be the one telling them that. I want to be the one showing them what's out there. I don't want them to find out because they hear a weird conversation with kids that they don't understand. So I feel like it absolutely starts at home. It starts with subtleties at home, and it starts with direct conversations. I feel like all the things that we're talking about, there's not going to be one answer. There's a million different ways. There has to be a million paper cuts that we're all coming at this from different ways. For me right now, I feel like my most powerful way, I live in the Dallas area, is how I speak with my friends, how they speak with me, how I speak in my home, how my children speak. That's something I can control, and I can make an impact on the people around me. I think some people that aren't raising kids and are, in, different roles in finance or wherever, they're going to have a different set of things that they can run at, to help be a part of the solution. And so, I'm here for all of this. And I feel like as awful as everything has been, especially, recently, again, it's nothing new. I don't think it's just on the front page, but I think it's like back to, you have to do something. You're at a certain point, we're accountable to this world we live in. And so for me right now, the books we read, the conversation we have, direct, indirect, that's where my husband and I are putting our focus with our kids. And then in the relationships we have, the people we're talking to, and, the documentaries I'm watching and books I'm reading, and I'm doing more than I've done before because I have my eyes wide open to what's going on. I'm not going to be one that's sitting there like, gosh, I hope people figure this out. This is terrible. Like, that's the problem, I think, is when people are waiting for somebody else to solve it. Not that I'm going to have the answer, but I'm certainly going to be a part of it and in the conversation that's working towards making this injustice, improved, or I don't know what the right word is, but so.
No, and honestly, Megan, thank you for going out on that limb. I mean, I know for me, right, 41-year-old male, single father of 3, that this is a very uncomfortable conversation, right? I don't want to talk about racism. I don't want to be, it's just difficult, right? It's not easy to talk about as a white male.
Well, and I just want to say too, like I've also learned when I've heard people say like it's exhausting when people are constantly coming to you wanting you to educate them. And I feel like we live in a place now, you don't have to do that. If you do a little bit of work, you can get a lot of information. And so I love these things for people to have the conversation. And, but I'm like, I don't care about my comfort. My comfort is it's fine compared to what we're actually talking about, And so I hate it. I mean, I hate that this is a conversation that we have to have, but I feel like it's so important, and it's not going anywhere unless we have these conversations, and unless we all find the way that we can be a part of the solution. It's not going anywhere.
And I agree 100%, right? But it's difficult, right? This is something that you have to be willing to talk about, and not everyone is. So I appreciate that. I appreciate the fact that this conversation. This is a situation where everybody needs to unite, and we need to find equality, and we need to do all those things. I don't think that there's going to be a gender equality. I don't think there's going to be all these different equalities until we start getting rid of labels completely, right? And that's where I think the education, situation has to play a major role, because label kids in very minor ways, but it also desensitizes kids to labels and makes us see our differences. So, Chet, I want to go with you, and with your futurism, right? And we've talked about many different systemic issues. Many systems have systemic issues. What, in your mind, is the one that we really need to make that first leap? Because I don't think we do them all at once. Don't. Or can we?
Yes. Actually, honestly, we have to. And I know people don't like hearing that because they say, oh, it's too much. We can only do one thing at a time, But here's our greatest challenge is that we tend to silo all of these problems. Misogyny, climate change, racism, income inequality, police violence. We silo them in thinking that somehow if we could just solve that one thing, the rest of life will be better. That's just not true. What we really have to sit back and look at our society as it stands and say, are we good people? Now, we individually may be good people. Collectively, I would say that for the past few centuries, we haven't shown up as well as we like to think that we are. And that's the honest truth that we really haven't gotten to. That maybe there is, as I said at the beginning, there's a rot in the community that we have yet to deal with. And yes, we had someone was saying something about, this is going to take some time. We don't have that time. I can assure you of this. As a futurist, my job is a kind of, to look at the tea leaves, as it were, or to follow the trends and look and see what's going to happen. There will be chaos after this election, whoever wins. There is going to be a period of time of us trying to decide again who we want to be. And so we have a moment in order to tie these things together, to connect the dots. Now, usually people say, again, it's too big, Chad. It's exhausting. Yeah, I know about the exhausting part, believe me, all of my life. But here's the real part, is that if we don't connect, once we connect the dots, what happens is that we find the whole thing a lot easier, because now we're dealing with the source instead of the symptoms. That's where we're making the mistake, is that we're constantly dealing with symptoms and thinking that if we just whack-a-mole, we'll get that one down and then another one pops up and we're just going around and around and it's crazy. That's exhausting. That is madness. So we finally have to get a chance to start to ask big questions. I can tell you this right now. I don't get invited to some parties anymore because they say, oh, it's the futurist coming. I don't want to talk to this dude because he's going to talk to me about climate change. And I don't want to deal with that. I just want to get my party on, and don't invite him. I actually heard that at one time at a party. So I don't get invited as much as I used to. But it's okay, because there's a point where we have to have a bigger conversation. You've all seen Jaws, right? At least at one time in your life, right? So there's Brody back there throwing chum on the water, and Quinn is in the cab. He's throwing chum on the water, and this giant shark comes up out of the water. Brody backs up into Quinn, and he says, we're going to need a bigger boat.
A bigger boat.
We are at a place where we need a bigger boat. And we haven't been able to have that question to stop and say, what are all of these things have in common? What are they all? Is there a source that they all stem from? And so when we start to deal with that, I assure you, once we start to deal with the source, who are we as a people? Then all of the other things become easier to deal with, because again, we're not isolating, siloing, and dealing with symptoms instead of the problem. So I'll say this, and then I'll let it go, that there is, we're doing something on our end where we've actually created, you're going to have to give us 6 months. So those of you who are looking to say, hey, we want to participate, give us about 6 months, 3 months as we're working out all the legal details. But we've created a private equity fund that basically supports, provides seed capital to Black and brown businesses that are addressing climate crisis. So in order for them to qualify to get the funds, that they have to have a solution to climate crisis, or some kind of solution that deals with resilience in the community and empowerment. And then inside of that structure, they have to deal with systemic racism and income inequality. That seems like it's asking a lot, but now when I started talking to the participants, they were like, oh, they're all kind of tied to the same thing. Of course they are. They're all tied to the same thing. You deal with one, you start to deal with the rest of it. So you cannot ignore the rest of it once you start to deal with solutions. So we are actually doing that. And we started realizing that if we start creating that level of infrastructure, we start to create what I believe is the solution is connected communities that that when communities start to take back their power, remember now, the guys in Washington aren't our leaders. They are our servants. They're supposed to be exercising what we tell them to do. That for some reason we got this thing mixed up. We think that they're the not. We're the ones. So when the communities become empowered and they start to get the money necessary in order to create great things, then we become the power source, and then the elected officials start to reflect our desires, as opposed to those who are funding them through the Citizens United ruling, which was an absolute disaster and turned our democracy or our representative government into a plutocracy. But that's another story. So what we believe is in connected communities, and we believe that we have to create another kind of infrastructure. And more importantly, in each of these groups, we ask them about beliefs. So the belief can't be every man for himself. I got mine, you get yours, because that's the belief system that got us here in the first place. That's the madness that's brought us here, where people are willing to sacrifice other people and the planet and other species so that they can get theirs. You cannot put brown faces in those places and say, oh, it's going to be better. How? If we have the same belief, if we're doing the same beliefs, people always talk about the revolution. The revolution is just changing places. It's not changing the structure. It's reshuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic. So we have to get to at least another place of thinking, what new infrastructure reflects our core beliefs? What do we want for our children? Because whatever is in place right now, it is not the one that we want. It has brought us to the point of an extinction level event called climate crisis and all of the other symptoms that go along with that. So when we connect all of those things, then we start to actually think of solutions that are more infrastructure based than how do we feel good.
Thank you, Chet. That was the infinite wisdom that I learn every time you speak is amazing. It's a beautiful thing. I really love it. Always have and always will. I appreciate you. So where do we take it from here? I mean, Dr. Russ, what direction do you want to run with this a little bit? Because I'm going to let you guide your own piece of this, because I don't know how to go on top of what Chet said. I just don't.
So we are facing a daunting task when we try to determine what to do first. I'm a strategist. And for me, the definition of strategy is how do we get from where we are to where we want to be? So we have a sense of what this society will look like, and we don't have to imagine it because it's written in the Constitution. We all are supportive of what the Constitution says. The promise of the Constitution is something that we all support, and as a military person, that was what I supported. And people will challenge me and say, how can you say this or say that when you fought to support the Constitution? I said, well, I did fight to support the Constitution, but I don't agree with the practices of how we have lived up to that Constitution. So we have the vision of what we want this thing to look like. We all know what justice looks like. I think we all need to take our part, because not all of us are the same, with the same resources and with the same personalities and with the same, confidence to go a certain direction. So what I've chosen as my direction, first of all, was with my boys. My wife and I have 4 sons. And as they were growing up, I didn't have the conversations with them that they faced any limitations. So I didn't say you're going to have a problem going out there because there are going to be people who are going to stand in your way and prevent you from getting this and getting that. I did not share that with them. As much as I had experienced it, I said, you are going to be able to benefit and progress in your life based on your performance. And that was the message. My kids have been in inner city urban schools. They've been in private schools. They've been in private independent schools. Those school systems are vastly different. And there's something that some of you may have heard of, is called the school to prison pipeline. It's a real thing. As much as people may deny it, it's a real thing. Because in the inner city schools, you have classrooms that have 30 kids in there. They're underfunded. They don't have books. They don't have libraries. They don't have the resources. And what are they told to do all day? Sit down and be quiet. It becomes a behavioral control process. So where is that process useful and valuable? In a prison, because you're going to be sitting in a prison cell for a very long time, and you have to be able to handle that. So the school is really training them to be in that. You get into the private schools, they're training them for middle management. You get into the private independent schools, and they're training them to be CEOs and politicians and doctors and lawyers. Once I realized that that school system existed, my wife and I basically mortgaged our financial future to make sure that our kids were in that system, because that's the one that works. That's the one that gave them the opportunity to be able to move up. It also changed the game from the perspective that they were smart kids. So of course, they were one of the few Black kids in their schools. Other kids who saw how smart they were like, well, you can't tell me that Black people are not smart, because I know this kid and he's brilliant. And so that kind of changed the dynamic from a personal parental standpoint from what I could do. And it was interesting because when my son was young, I said, man, I'm worried about him because he's not developing the survival skills that I had to develop when I was growing up. And I'm concerned. But at a certain point, when I began to see his trajectory in society, I said, he's not going to have to deal with the same things that I had to deal with. Progression. So I say things are not getting worse, because when you look at lynching and you look at all those things that came through history, but there's still some very horrific things going on. But getting back to the solution, so the solution is how we raise our children. The solution that I am taking action on is what I call economic activism, because it's very difficult to change the system. And I have had many people who have been after me to become a politician, to run for office, to get in there and do these things. Because I don't believe that. I said earlier that legislation is the power. Voting is what sets us up so that we can get the right people in to change and enact the legislation. It takes too long for me. It's this amount of effort to get this amount of progress. So what I decided to do is what I call economic activism. And my company, which is called Sistro, Systems for Strategy and Organization, is focused at helping businesses in the pre-profitability stage gain traction in the financial and profitability stage, so that then they can take control of their own futures. And if we can change the economic development of communities, having business owners who can then generate enough revenue to provide for their families, in that perspective, I feel like I can make a much more rapid difference in the community, regardless of what the system does. And so that's the passion for me, is to get in there and say, I will help you to build a company where you can be in control of your income, enough money so that you can provide for your family, and in that way remove the vulnerability and potential to become a victim. Because now another aspect of this social injustice is where you're in a community where it's being over policed. Now, when on a daily basis, you're subject to becoming a victim within that system just because you're there. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Terry stops and all that kind of thing. It's so I won't go into that, but you're in that community where you're subject to those type of rules and those types of laws, and it makes you a victim. So economic activism is kind of where I'm going with being able to make a difference and change the system. I want to say one last thing, a little bit off the subject, but it's right in there, is that systemic racism is inherent in the census. When you fill out the census says this is how many white people, this is how many Black people, this is how many Hispanic people, and also where you are. So when you can isolate people based upon their ethnicity, then you can implement things like redlining. You can implement things like gerrymandering. You can influence the way the vote goes and who gets into office. And so when people want to deny that there's systemic racism, if we just take that out of the census, how would you be able to determine who's where so you can target them? And then they want to take the census one step further, where now they want to say, have people checking whether they're a citizen or a not citizen, because then that will help them target immigrants versus undocumented immigrants. Now you can target undocumented immigrants based on what you see in the census. So these are things that are creating the framework that enable us to continue with the systemic racism aspect.
No, and that's a huge point again, right? We're back to labeling, we're back to identifying labels, and we're back to pinpointing it in job applications. Why do you have to talk about your race, your sexual orientation, any of these differences? Even your gender doesn't matter anymore, right? Like that. Why are those things on applications? Why does that need to be there anymore?
Yeah.
I feel like we've lost the human part of humanity, right?
Mhm.
And people keep forgetting that we are a human race, right? Yeah. We're as a race, we are the human race, and the only way this human race survives is if we unify together or find equality or find whatever that equal playing field is for all, no matter what the differences may be. The divisive nature of society changes, everything else, the rise and fall of empires, everything that we've looked at over the course of history. We're sitting here, and once things get divided and socioeconomic stuff, when socioeconomic things change and get really out of hand, right, which is really where we're headed now, you start seeing this is when empires fail, right?
I will say one quick thing in there, and that is that, from a military career, 27 years active service, that was the closest thing to a meritocracy that I've ever seen anywhere, where performance determines your progression. And what was the differentiator between being in the military and the non-military community is the mission. I remember national security. Our job was to make sure that this country and the people in it have freedom, and they can exercise and do the things that they want to do without worry of somebody restricting them from those freedoms. And so what we need in the non-military community is that same sort of mission, where we want to present to the world how we live up to this Constitution that we've so very well crafted. And if the people in the country take that on as the mantle and as where we want to be, then it takes a little bit less away from how I'm being affected in my pocket, and how we are all progressing and growing together as a community. And in that sense, now you're not thinking so much again about what the ethnicities are and what they're doing and how they're doing it. We're progressing together as a group. And that's one of the things that I think is translatable from my military career to my non-military experience.
Definitely. And I appreciate that, Dr. Russ. Thank you so much for, your wisdom from your experience is enormous, and it brings another perspective to the table. Stanley, why don't you just run with this a little bit and potential solutions with everything in your knowledge and experience? I really think that, the more we talk about solutions, the better off we are, right? And the different solutions we hear, the better off we are.
Well, certainly, voting, number one, it goes without saying. And to another panelist, I think to continue to have our conversations with our children, our grandchildren. I have 2 grandchildren, and to have that dialogue with them, because what really pushes change is the younger folks. It happened, throughout the generations. You think about John Lewis, who just passed away, and folks learned so much about him just after he passed, where they found that, he was a young 17-year-old, writing Dr. Martin Luther King, says, I don't want these colored, first white water fountains and so forth. And 23 years old, that when March on Washington, and they were pushing it. They were pushing back in the 60s, in the early mid 60s, in the late 60s. And we're seeing today just an incredible push, unprecedented around the world, and it's led by young people. So we need to continue to encourage them, because the pace of the change is moving faster and faster as a result of mostly the young folks as influenced by technology. And we talk about, I think someone talked about the school systems and how we need to change. The reality is media is much more powerful. I've been in media, my entire life. I studied media going back to watching a movie in college called Taxi Driver that ushered in a whole new level of graphic violence in movies. Media is much more powerful than whatever we're going to be taught, within the school walls. And what's happening is that as a result of social media, particularly Facebook, we're exposed almost daily throughout the course of the day. Many clips, 2 to 4 minutes, speeches from folks in the past. We're getting a real education around the kinds of things that we really need to know that we're just not taught in schools. And so while we can push back on curriculum and school systems, reality is that, as we talked about from the very beginning, technology is just driving new thought. It's challenging belief. Young people are getting, having access to information that we just never had access to. So that's one thing that is happening, and we just need to continue to encourage it. The other thing is to the point of the futurists, and I forget your name. I apologize. You talked about silos and really beginning to challenge everything. I had the opportunity to do lectures in China and Japan, and I can tell you, China, as much as people here, some people talk about this as being this communist country and they're so horrible. You go there and there's building everywhere. The cranes are all over the place, and folks are living their lives. And while there may be things that they don't like, just as there may be things that we don't like with our current system, they're functioning, they're thriving. There are folks who are very, very wealthy. And where does all of that come? A lot of that come from. It comes from this country. I mean, as factories were shut down in this country, they were opened up in China. And in fact, when I was CEO of a turf company, and the Chinese company Taishan wanted to buy us so they could have a footprint here in America, and that all the manufacturing of turf that typically occurs in Dalton, Georgia, would out of the carpet belt would happen, in China, in Shandong province. And we fail to look at why that happens. So why is it that, there's a group of folks who say that this country is so terrible, yet we'll close down, take jobs away from our own folks here in the United States and give them to them and make that country a very powerful country? Is communism all that bad? And capitalism that good that in order to make more money and squeeze the middle class, that we would just go to a country that we have deemed as having a horrible system for so long? So these are the kind of questions I think we have to look into as well. We can't stay in the same box and say, well, here's the box, and so we have to fix it. It could be the very system, and you hear some folks that are considered progressive or socialist, and they're raising those kinds of questions, and I think it's valid to raise those questions. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Stanley. I appreciate it. I think that there's lots of wisdom there, right? And all about saving that bottom line and creating the jobs overseas and forcing the business to go there. And then once it's there, then we want it back, right? And then it's policy changes and how do we do it? And then you raise tariffs and then cost of goods goes up, the value of the dollar goes down. And we have this vicious cycle that we've entered over the last period of time. How do we turn that around? And the reality is, with technology, a lot of those jobs are going to disappear anyway, right? So how do we, without education, be able to transfer that into the youth? And my belief is that we put more into digital devices, right? Rather than looking at them as a negative with kids having digital devices, being babysitters for their kids, which I do it all the time, right? Just so that I can do my conference calls. Single dad of 3, I don't have a choice. But what I try to do is put them on games that they can learn something. Even if it is Farmville, at least they're learning the cost of goods versus the sale, right? They're learning something and absorbing information. It's something as simple as that. But my son looks at me now and he says, I want to make this, and then I want to go try and sell it at the beach one day. He says, it's got to cost me something to make it. So what's it costing me? That's an 8-year-old kid that figured it out from playing Farmville, no other reason. So I don't think that these games are as bad as we make them out to be. I just think that it's easy to make it to villainize it as, because it's just a default, right? Now, granted, handing them all day long and saying, go do your thing so I can watch TV or whatever it might be, obviously that's not the solution either. But I think that there needs to be this healthy environment where they're able to use these devices to learn these skill sets. Because by the time my 3-year-old goes into a workforce, some of these careers won't exist anymore, right? And our education system was created for the Industrial Revolution to create workers. A lot of those jobs won't exist anymore. So I feel like this is part of the change that needs to be impacted. And this is where I really want to hand it off to Liz, right? Because me and Liz ran off with this topic. And I know that she's passionate about this. So I really want Liz to run with this. Unless she has something else that she wants to say, but I know that this is a passion. And my 3-year-old wants a hug.
Oh, well, I have a 5-year-old, so I totally understand. We're all going through definitely some unforeseen times and working from home. And as an educator, I've worked in higher education for about 20 years. I started as an admissions counselor. I worked in the higher ed sphere, the non-traditional education sphere, for-profit education, and transitioned into a faculty role and have been a faculty member for about the past decade. I currently work as an instructional designer, so I design online classes, and in the pivot to online learning have assisted my school and worked with other colleges and universities in deploying online classes. So you're right, technology and being able to reimagine how we deliver education is going to change. And that reimagining of education, of how we educate the youth, of what kinds of courses we offer. And I agree that social media plays a huge role in that. Stanley talked about it, that education really can't keep up, and education has refused to keep up. And that's where we're getting a big reality check, because now that we're having to try to pivot with all the safety concerns with online learning and trying to keep our students safe. I have a 21-year-old, a sophomore in college, and she's like, Mom, I'm taking the semester off. I'll probably go back next year or something like that, because students, they don't feel comfortable. We don't really have the answers. We don't have anything stable as far as any proper safety protocols. We're just kind of piecing it together as we go. So in terms of our role as educators, we definitely need to be I think some of the panelists alluded to this. Megan talked about it as far as having these honest conversations and being open and forthright with your children, and making sure, Stanley talked about it with the grandkids, making sure that they understand. And we don't always have all of the answers, but we have to be open to those questions and making sure that our kids are not deluded into thinking that our country is perfect. Who is perfect? George Washington wasn't perfect, but there's no man that is perfect. So to ask us as a country to say, oh, well, you can't criticize the founding fathers, you can't criticize slavery, you can't criticize, the way that our country has developed. I think it alludes to what Stanley talked about. Maybe we need to think outside of the box. I'm an immigrant, so I sometimes tell people I was raised here, but I think my ability to think outside of the structure of just America is a little bit different, because we can't always just think that way. We have to somewhat be a little bit open to the idea. I told somebody when we were thinking about education and us pivoting to online, and the fact that a lot of schools were going to be online for the foreseeable future, I said, we need disruptors. We need to disrupt the way that we think. When Chet talked about, and also Russ talked about this idea of military and this idea of global climate change and all these things being interwoven. The fabric of all of our lives is interwoven. So why not think about all of these challenges that we have to overcome, education being one of them? We have to now totally pivot the way that we deliver education. And it needed to be done. As somebody said, we're educating for the Industrial Revolution. So it was past time for us to pivot, right? So it's the same thing when it comes to all these different systems, whether it's democracy, whether it's climate change, whether it's looking at things in more of the way that the military does. We had I talked with somebody who's the president of the college. He said, we needed to deploy COVID response more like we would have did in the military. Maybe we would have had a handle on this thing. So there's a lot of things that sometimes we get stuck in. This is how we handle it, America. This is how we handle things, and we don't want to step outside the box. I told somebody I was speaking with, a college president, disruptors. We have disruptors. We have Netflix. We have Uber. Who would have thought 10 years ago? I asked my husband, would you have thought 10 years ago that you'd have got on an app and called a complete stranger to come pick you up and give you a ride to the airport? If you would have told me you would have been doing that 10 years ago, I'd have said, you done lost your mind. Are you crazy? Why would you do that? But that's disruption. That's somebody thinking and saying, you know what? We're not going to do things the way that we used to. Netflix, you know what? Instead of us going to Blockbuster on a Sunday night or a Saturday night and standing there and looking at all the shelves and all the movies you want are not there, let's just sit in our house and scroll on an app or scroll on. We'd have been like, are you crazy? That's impossible, right? So we have to think outside of the box. Somebody had me to read, I started to read that movie, that book. I had the audio book, 0 to 1. Have y'all heard about that? The book about disruption. And the things that are disruptive are the things that we have never thought about. That's what makes a true disruption. That's what makes something innovative. Who'd have thought Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos sitting in their garage shipping books to people? And now we have revolutionized. People don't even want to go to the mall. The malls are closed because we're all on an app purchasing stuff that we would have said 10 years ago, I can't get that on an app. I have to go to the mall and drive and waste gas and walk in the sun and park and go past the food court. Who would have thought 10 years ago that we'd be doing this stuff? So we have to break out of the way that we approach problems. Educating our youth differently, exposing them to those difficult conversations. We call them difficult, but homophobia is not different. Don't treat somebody different because of who they share their bed with. That's not a revolutionary thing. But for a lot of us, for the past 10 years, it's what we grew up, people saying, that's not right. That's against the. And now if you say that, you might get fired. People will ostracize you if you dare even think that way. And that's how we have to look at situations like climate change. That's how we have to look at things such as racism. That's why we have to look at misogyny. That's how we have to look at every single problem as this is a problem and we have to fix it, and we have to come up with revolutionary ways to do that. And it may turn your whole way of thinking. Somebody said to me, what's so wrong with socialism? I'm from England. So I'm like, nothing's wrong with socialism. We take care of our old people. We take care of our babies. We take care of our sick people. My grandmother's there right now. And that lady gets a nurse coming into the house. That lady gets some pocket money. But we have been taught that is wrong. The same way that people have been taught we have meritocracy. The same way people have been taught a black man, we got to tase him because if you don't jump on top of him and beat him over the head with a club, he's a danger. And I was fearing for my life. That's why I got to get on the phone and call 911 because he can't tell me to put my dog on a leash because I'm afraid. So now this man is in handcuffs and he's beat over the head and he's going to jail because we've been taught these things and no one's questioning it. That's dumb. Why do you think that way? Why can't you get on an app and just call somebody to pick you up? It's better than Yellow Cab. It's cheaper, but we're programmed. And we have to come out of that programming, whatever it is, whether it's education, whether it's race, whether it's misogyny, whether it's homophobia. We got to get rid of all these things and turn the way that we think. And what Russ said and what Stanley said and what Chet said, I wrote them down because we as a society, all this pull yourself up and you got to get yours, I got mine, that's got to go out the window. If we're ever going to progress as a country, we have to start looking at how we can come together and stop being such a dog eat dog way of thinking. That's why it's okay to shoot somebody in the back 7 times because that person was a threat and it was him or me. And if that means he's in a wheelchair for the rest of life, I could have hit his kids. Oh, well, and that's got to stop. It's got to.
Thank you. That was, as I assume, that was powerful, and I think everybody recognized that and felt it. There's a couple things that you said that I wanted to go over real quick. One is it is our job to criticize our leaders, right? It is our job. And if we can't look at history and criticize our former heroes, our former leaders, then we're doing something wrong, because we only learn from going over their mistakes. The minute we start erasing mistakes is the minute that they continue to happen. So that's a huge part of this, right? We're so programmed that these false idols and false heroes are heroes, and they were infallible and couldn't make a single mistake, that when we start identifying mistakes, they become these crippling things, when really everyone makes mistakes, and they lived in a different time, right? So we have to identify that, and then we have to change our thought process of, just because they were a hero 200 years ago doesn't mean they'd be a hero today, right? Yeah. And that's evolution of time, right? That's evolution of society. But if we're still scared to look at those things, then we're never going to get there. Go ahead, Chet.
Yeah, Mike.
I feel it. I feel it.
Yeah, I want to riff on something that Liz talked about, which I think is really the key. She says, which is absolutely the most important thing that we have to think about, is not just thinking outside of the box. We have to get to the point of realizing that there is no box. We are no longer
the matrix. It's the matrix.
We're no longer tethered to those conventions that got us into this place in the first place. I think it was Einstein, I'm paraphrasing, but he says, the mind that got you here will not be the mind that will get you out. So if we are talking about transforming all of this, and even if we just want to say, I just want to cut up my piece of the pie and just deal with misogyny, okay. I guarantee you that it will lead you back to the rest of the things, because you cannot look at those things in a vacuum and isolate and say, oh, I'm just going to deal with that. I don't know about the racism thing. How could you not? So we are now at a place where we have to think beyond the box. There is no box. We're no longer tethered to those conventions. And I thank Liz for bringing that point out.
Guys, it's open, so if anybody feel free to kind of run with this. I mean, I think there's a big stem back to mental health stigmas, insecurities, shames. We live in a society that we have these stigmas, and we've self-created them. In honor of Annie Lieb, right, who's been on many of these shows with us, you know, she's a huge mental health advocate, and there's a big component there to what leads to these issues and how that funnels into the problems around this. And as long as there's stigmas around that, then we're not going to see progress in many ways. And that's a big part of this. And anybody, it's open, so feel free.
I was heard something that stuck with me. Even Kenny did some teach-ins, and he did one with Isabel Wilkerson. And she talked about a concept that I think as we're talking about all the things, you know, not just racism, but all these huge things, the way she shared this really, it resonates with all of them. She was talking about, it's like we've inherited a house from our family, and the house has a leak in the basement, and we can ignore the leak, but it's just going to get worse, and it's going to cause more problems, and it's, you know, it's not going to get you can't, you know, act like it's not happening. And no matter what the topic, it's the same. Like, we can act like climate change isn't happening, we can act like there isn't systemic racism, we can act like misogyny is not a problem, but we've inherited this. So now, now we're talking about it, so now it's time to put things in action. And so all the things that everyone's talked about, I think, are so important. But I felt like, for me, that was like, I don't know, just a way that I think I hear some people defending or like deflecting, needing to acknowledge what's going on. And I'm like, that's your death. You know, that might be dramatic, but I'm like, if you just do that, then you have a house worth nothing. Like, you've got to take care of your house. And so that, her analogy for me was like, oh, that's such a great way to explain.
Megan,
why
in their defense, let me just say this, if that sounds right. A lot of times people are defending this is because there are two societies that exist in this country, and one is doing quite well. Look at the stock market, but the vast majority of people are catching hell. So for them they have to defend it because they are defending their personal way of life, and they don't see an association with that other part of the society.
And if there is an association, those people are just not working hard enough. Those people, maybe they should have went to school. Maybe they should have paid attention. Maybe they shouldn't live in a bad neighborhood. Maybe they should comply. There's always a reason and there's a failure to look at the systemic roots. We got a primer from Stanley on just Russ gave us a primer, Chet gave us a primer on just the historic, just the epidemia of all of this. This is not something that happened yesterday. This is not something that happened 2 weeks ago. This is not something that happened when George Floyd died, where people are like, oh my God, the blacks are angry. The blacks are so, upset. No, we've been angry for, honey, we stepped in this country 1619. This is not something that happened yesterday. And all of these layers of slavery for 150 years. And you have Jim Crow segregation for another 100 years. And you have disenfranchisement. You got to remember, I told somebody, get out your calculator. 1865, if you put 79 plus 79, that's Stanley talked about it, that's 2 generations. That's 2 lifetimes. That is not 1,000,000 years ago. Oh my God, stop talking about it. Do you guys have to keep dragging it up? Yes, because how were we supposed to develop how were we supposed to develop wealth? There was a statistic that said the millennials are moving home with their parents. I could not move home with my parents. My parents were like, I live in an apartment. I barely am getting up above water myself, because we never had an opportunity. And when I say wealthy, people are like, well, I wasn't wealthy. My family struggled too. But statistically speaking, 9 times out of 10, if I'm making 62 cents to your dollar as a black woman, or if a black man is making 82 cents to your dollar, and we multiply that by 2, 3, 4 generations, you might not be wealthy, but you're wealthier than me. That adds up to $1 million over the course of my lifetime alone. Now, what do I pass down to my daughter? When my daughter's out there, honey, don't come home to me because I don't have nothing for you. And then it alludes to a lot of what Stanley and Chet talked about, where you have people making bad decisions. Because if you can't save and you have never had a foundation, you didn't have parents that could say, okay, well, you know what? Let me see if I can give you a few $1,000s to get yourself set up. It might not be a lot, but my parents can't even do that. Then you can see where systemically, generation after generation after generation, I have friends whose parents went to segregated schools. I have friends whose grandparents were sharecroppers. So when we're thinking about how to solve this, we have to acknowledge that it wasn't a lifetime, 100 years ago. It wasn't 1 billion years ago. It wasn't 1,000,000 years ago. These are things that have happened relatively close in terms of the time frame. And we have to build from there and look at equity, look at hiring practices. I think about in terms of your purview, and if you have the ability to hire, and if you have the ability to ensure that you're giving opportunity, then why not make sure that you're giving opportunity to those that might not have the opportunity? When I'm in my classroom, I'm making sure that I'm inclusive in my classroom, that I'm making sure that I'm encouraging the students in my classroom to have confidence, because nobody, when I was at University of Florida, they said, look left, look right, neither of those people will be there at graduation. Do I want somebody to tell my daughter that as an undergrad at her college? Would I have wanted that for myself? It's not. So when you know better, you do better. And that's why we have to get these conversations out here. We have to make sure that we continue to educate people. And when people think about microaggressions, okay, somebody's touching your hair. Okay, so you have to straighten your hair. Big deal. It is a big deal. Because up until 10 years ago, if I didn't straighten my hair, I probably wasn't getting a job. Now I don't even care. And I'm just going to make my own business if it comes down to it. But should I have to? Shouldn't I be able to be my authentic self and not have to affect a personality or not have to affect a way of being? I can't put on my bangle earrings because, oh, that's not professional. But if you have on some dangly chandelier earrings, that is professional. So in our heads, we have, I think Stanley talked about it, media. My children, when they saw Black is King, they were diving off the couch. They were doing the African dances. They said, okay, mommy, now put on Black Panther. We had a whole jamboree, just a whole celebration in here. It was like Juneteenth 2.0 in here when Black is King came out. We watched that on Disney Channel, and then they were like, okay, go ahead and put on Black Panther. So when we were heartbroken when Chadwick Boseman passed away over the weekend, you can understand why. Because he was our Black Superman. This was our hero. And when people say that, well, what's the big deal? Stanley can tell you that media representation goes a long way to a cop saying, you know what, let me fire on this Black man because this man gonna spin around. He got superhuman power and he's like the Hulk. he don't have a gun, but, you know, he could probably smash me. And where are you getting that idea from, sir? What the ideas that they're getting? I talked to somebody and they said, you know what, the idea of a designated driver, that was something that was in a paper, a university paper, and somehow it got into a movie and it became a natural part of our life. We all started talking about designated driver. We need to see Stanley. We need to see Chet. We need to see all these beautiful people, myself included, that are educated, that are talking about these issues. We're not all drug dealers. We're not all baby mamas. I had somebody on LinkedIn tell me, you Black women, y'all like to have babies by yourself. That's a part of the problem. Y'all want to raise children on your own. Really? That's what's happening. That's what we're doing. Because I'm a married woman, but where are you getting that from, sir? Are you looking at some TV show that's telling you that? So we need to really attack many levels, but it starts with conversation. We have to have those conversations, and we can't make them be uncomfortable. I'm not uncomfortable talking about homophobia because I love my gay folk the same way I love my straight folk, and I know I'm at the top of the food chain. So it's my job, because I'm the married cisgender woman, I have to make sure that I speak up and make my voice be heard, so that if that person feels uncomfortable, I go out of my way to make sure they're not uncomfortable. And we need our white folk that are out there in positions of power and people like yourselves that have these platforms to get these conversations out here so that people understand once you're educated, you can't say you didn't know, because we told you.
Man.
That's 100%.
Wow. I'm just wow. It's so true. It is. So, real quick, guys, before we start getting close to wrap up time, I'm just going to pull up a few things. Liz, here was the book that you were talking about, correct?
Yes, that's the one, 0 to 1. Exactly. I was just recommending. I just started reading it.
Good. And then Russ, this was a documentary, correct?
That's correct.
So guys, if you want to go out there, and of course, Megan, you were talking about Isabel Wilkerson as well. That's one of her books. Really great book. Guys, again, that just shows who we are as people, what we go out there and do. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have some shameless self-promotion. I just came out with my my 5th book, and it's called You and the New Normal. And it basically talks about the whole aspect of what this new normal really means, so that we deal with it from the perspective of how it's going to transform us individually, collectively, and society if we see it as such. It's called You and the New Normal. You can get it from Amazon.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Chet. That's awesome. I'm going to check that out. So anybody else, shameless plugs, please do.
Please check out my podcast. It's called The Ed Up Experience. We put out on all of the major podcasting platforms several episodes per week with higher education leadership, usually college presidents. I'm starting a series myself on anything where we're talking about racial equity, representation, anything that people want to talk about. We just got to have as many voices lifted to talk about these issues, make sure that we're talking about education and the role we play, and also just make sure that we're being forthright and forthcoming and just transparent, so that everyone doesn't feel ashamed to ask these questions and really have their voice heard when it comes to these issues.
What's it called again, Liz?
It's called The Ed Up Experience.
Yes.
And you can find us at edupexperience.com.
Awesome. That is.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I will definitely be checking that out. Anybody else got anything to share? Please do if you do. Go ahead, Megan.
Totally different deal, but we have positive, encouraging, fun dance classes for kids, boys, girls, and it's all about building their confidence when they're little. They're tiny. They come into our classes right now. We've got Zoom classes going, so anybody can do it no matter where you are. And it's inclusive and fun and encouraging and positive, and it's kind of a new way to, have them enjoy learning something new. And so my company is called Tippy Toes, and it's just really lots of fun, lots of goodness for kids too. So that is available now, and it's just something I'm really proud of.
Awesome. Guys, I'm going to pull all this stuff and put it into the show notes as well, so people can go find the links to your website, Liz, and then I'll also put the link to your book, Chet, as well, so people can go find it on Amazon. And, of course, Megan, I will look for it as well and send a direct link as well. That's awesome. Go ahead.
I do have one other question. For the gentleman who used to work in cable, I'm sorry, sir, I didn't...
Stanley.
Stan, yes. I used to work in cable. Actually, I started off in research and development at ATC when it was out here. I was a protege of Gail Greer. Are you familiar with her?
I remember that name, yes.
Yeah. Okay. It's one of those things.
Small world.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. I used to install Time Warner cable, so I was on the low end, but hey,
hey, that's the most important.
That's it, right? I was the one climbing in the roofs and putting in your wire and cable and putting your internet and your triple plays and everything else, man.
Oh, yeah, nobody makes money until the installer.
So I want to close this by saying something. No, I'm not done. Sorry, kid. Give me a couple more. Yeah, I'm almost done. I know you're tired. Yes, give me a minute. So I wanted to close this by saying I really appreciate all of you for participating, including the people that couldn't make it. There was different reasons. Everybody was chosen with intent, and the reason that they were chosen was because they had a purpose to be here in this conversation. I try to make this as diverse as possible with as many different experience sides as possible, because I think the more groups and more individuals and more areas that get represented, the better these conversations are. The people that aren't here are missed. They have their reasons. They have, whatever came up, and life happens, right? But I feel like, what we represented in this conversation is what needs to be represented in every room around the world, right? There needs to be groups of people coming together from all different backgrounds, all different experiences, sitting down and being willing to have these conversations. And I truly am grateful and appreciate all of you for participating. I really am. Thank you.
Hey, brother, thank you. Big ups to you for doing all this. Put this together, Mike.
Yes.
You do a lot of the work. You do a lot of the backbone, brother, and we appreciate you so much to no end. So thank you,
and
everybody.
I still can't figure out my 3-year-old. I don't know what she...
Yeah, I say thank you as well as also to the other panelists, because I learned a lot from the experiences that you had, and this has been a tremendous experience.
Yes, each one of you. So thank you, guys.
That we all decided we'd all go to a party with you.
Yes.
I would love
Yeah. I'm with you on that, brother.
I'll go with
I will tell you, I'm loud and live at a party. But that wasn't the reason why they excluded me. They're like, oh, not this guy. So thank you.
I think those are the best ones to have at the party. You learn so much. You walk away from me, go, you know what? I was dumber when I got there, but when I left, wow, what did I walk out with? I mean, really, really and truly, I do appreciate each one of you guys. Thank you so much for jumping on this evening, taking the time out of your night. Michael as well. Thank you so much. Megan, thank you. Chet, Russ, Stanley, Liz, each one of you guys are special, and you guys are what make this worthwhile doing every single time. So thank you, everybody, so much for watching. And thank everybody who's watching as well, who's been part of the show, commenting, everything else. I can't always pull up all the comments just because it does. Sometimes they're just huge comments, and it would take up the whole screen to pull up. But thank you, everybody. Again, it's been part of the show. You guys are, again, the lifeblood of what we do here, and it's really important that we continue these conversations. So thank you guys so much. We'll see everybody in 2 weeks. Thank you so much, guys. Everybody stay safe, stay blessed, and we'll talk to you again soon. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.